Hi, everyone. I am delighted to be here with Rana Kazkaz in Doha and Anas Khalaf in Paris, co-directors of The Translator. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So I thought we could start our conversation today by having you talk a little bit about what it has been like to launch a film in this crazy year. When did that start for you?
Rana, go ahead.
So we were in post-production, finishing up post-production, the last of it, last March, so just about a year ago, when everything started to fall apart with COVID. Sure. But at that time, nobody really knew what was going to happen. You know, was this going to be around for just 2 weeks or for a month? And so, you know, we proceeded as normal and tried to rush to, you know, make sure the film was ready in time for festivals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, to keep on track.
Right.
And then, you know, because we had gone out with it, with the film at the time that we had, there was, you know, we had to proceed regardless of what COVID was going to throw our way. That's what we've done, and that's where we are now, after 9 years of work.
Yes.
9 years.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so it started in TIFF in Toronto in September, end of September 2020, and then went to Tallinn in November 2020.
Right.
So
Okay.
the TIFF selection was an industry select, and the Tallinn was the official competition.
Okay. And Tallinn was a hybrid festival, is that right?
Yeah, it was, and we were invited to attend and to go there, and we were willing to, but the traveling permits in and out of Qatar were very complicated at that time. They really shut down the country to keep COVID outside. Sure. And that was very complicated for us to travel there, and we couldn't be at the premiere of our film, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and Justine, we have, I mean, you know, thankfully, I mean, the film is, you know, it's going to festivals, but we have yet to share the film with a live audience. We haven't seen it with an audience.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And I suppose at this point you don't even know when that might be.
We were supposed to go to Geneva, the FIFDH,
okay.
Human Rights Film Festival in Geneva, just beginning of March of this month. Great festival, the best in Europe for that. And we couldn't go because they finally switched it to online, and we were supposed to go and travel plans, but didn't happen. So we don't know when we're going to be able to share it with an audience. It's right. Really.
Well, I truly hope that you have that experience, because it is such a powerful film. And I hope that you're able to share the audience's experience of it.
Thank you.
So to turn to the film, I understand that there are aspects of the movie that are grounded in your own experience. Can you talk a bit about those?
Sure. So we were both living in Damascus in March 2011, when the revolution started on the heels of the Arab Spring that was launched in Tunisia and Egypt and Libya. And for myself, you know, it was a movement that I welcomed. And I had been used to participating as an activist in my life, you know, particularly when I lived in the US. And so it was strange for me then suddenly to be put in a situation where I didn't feel safe to participate. And we had passports that gave us the option to leave Syria whenever we wanted, unlike most of the people we knew, our friends and our family who didn't have that option. And our kids were really small at the time. And things got very scary and uncomfortable very quickly. And but Ennis and I weren't on the same page about what to do about that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I wanted to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to stay to witness history in Syria.
And I think with my choice to leave came feelings of shame and guilt. And so I began to question what it meant to participate or not. And the frustrations that I felt were channeled through this protagonist of Sammy, who is an Arabic and English translator and is used to being able to hide behind the words of others. And what he needs to end up doing is say what he stands for and find his voice, which became the theme of the film. And as I was writing this screenplay, what was interesting is that in the beginning, for 2 years, for the initial 2 years worth of drafts, I was scared to even write that the location was Syria. And so I would write unnamed country, or I would make up a country, because that's how afraid I was to even write that the events were taking place there. And I think what's the journey also for me as going through this is to have found a little bit of to just honor my voice. But beyond doing that, what became important was honoring the people who had participated. This was about the respect, trying to show respect, to hopefully restore some dignity, to let their lives not have been lived and their decisions not have been lived in vain, but that there was going to be this artistic record of saying, at this moment in time, this group of people stood for freedom and dignity in a nonviolent way. And then now the rest is history. Now 10 years later, we know what the consequences of that have been for the Syrian people to have dared to ask for their freedom and dignity.
You make a really interesting point, which is that, you're telling a contemporaneous story almost. And the fact that you worked on the film for 9 years means that history has evolved as the film has evolved. Were there any other ways that the film changed over that time in response to the changing situation in the country?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that it's very correct. Throughout those years of developing the film and the story and starting to look for financing, we heard many times from many different investors, producers, that this is too early to tell the story. This is still unfolding. It's too early to have sufficient distance with the events to tell the story. So that wasn't easy at all until later, after 2016, that we managed to start getting the financing together, which, by the way, took 8 countries co-financing to get together to make this film and be able to achieve the vision and make the film we wanted to make.
I think also the other aspect that was developing was with regards to the screenplay. It was about really trying to figure out what it was we were trying to say. What was this film trying to say? And so in the beginning, it was about, creating a character who was exploring having lived with fear and now starting to gain their courage. And it didn't work. it just wasn't working. And then he was too passive. The fear was making him too passive of a character. Then the next incarnation was, in order to honor, what the Syrians were saying out in the streets, was when they were saying we want freedom, we want dignity. It was trying to say, okay, well, it became a kind of investigation of, well, what is freedom? What is dignity? But, those are very abstract terms.
Sure.
And then it wasn't until there was the clarity of what it means to find your voice that the screenplay started to come together, that the story started to come together in a universal way. And so now, as we, in the world witness, now Myanmar is just, the next country to have, begun to demonstrate, following, a slew of other countries all over the world where we're starting, Russia, Venezuela, the US, France, that there is just one after another. Every time now I see these images on the news of the next, where is this happening now, where people are trying desperately to rise up, that I hope that within the translator, that although it is set in Syria, it's a Syrian story, that the universal theme of what it means to find your voice can resonate with people.
Yeah, clearly it has a broad application and a certain urgency, I think, in this moment, kind of an ongoing urgency that isn't, that began with the Arab Spring and continues. This is such an important story, and it's your own story. I'm wondering, because I believe it is also your first feature, is that correct?
Yes.
How did you go about figuring out how to tell it? I mean, Rana, you've talked a little bit about sort of how the story changed over time, but I guess it seems like a formidable challenge, right? Especially for a first film. It's a big subject, and clearly, like, one that means a great deal to you personally. How did you navigate that?
Well, there was already in 2015, 16, when we started to put the financing together, as said earlier, a lot of documentaries had already been done about the revolution, the war, about ISIS, about the refugees. I mean, it was already, Syrians were working a lot at telling the stories through documentaries, but fiction, narrative fiction was not yet there in the landscape. And we really wanted to make the story through fiction, and this was very important to us to tell the story that way. So this was the challenge, and as a first feature, it was very ambitious. We realized that since the first day of production until the last day, it was very ambitious. It was an ambitious first film. We're very happy with the result and what we have accomplished, but it was very difficult. It was very difficult to make. It was a lot of issues. I don't know, Rana, you want to tell about the difficulties and the problems we faced in Jordan shooting the film, but it was very difficult.
Well, I think, like Enes just said, I mean, it was 8 countries of co-production. We had actors from 10 different countries. Post-production alone took place in 5 different countries. We were dealing with a very politically sensitive story.
Sure.
And we were dealing with a very tragic story.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, I think this took a lot of emotional toll,
Yeah.
I think, as well. And there was also with Enes and I, what we began to recognize with regards to the actors was that because it was going to be a political thriller, like we knew that was the genre. So, it is fiction. And it is, it is meant to provide a journey for an audience, a dramatic journey for an audience. So you know, the political thriller, which is a genre we both love, is what felt most suitable. And so because politics was so integral to this story, that the actors that we ended up casting were all activists.
Oh,
They
that's
had a relationship to activism.
right.
Yeah, that was very important for us, and we really relied on their past, coming out of Syria, living what's actually happening in the film, and their activism that never stopped and never stopped growing after that, even when they left Syria. So yes, that was
And even our two main characters in Australia are Australian activists.
Mm.
You know, that was also, you know, again, like, I think that was something that worked really well on the acting level, is that there was this unification of a political awareness that all the actors brought to the table.
That informed their performance.
absolutely. And Rana just said earlier, politically sensitive. There's one example, one scene, one very, very important scene of the film, like every scene, but this one, 20 minutes before starting to shoot the scene in the area of the suburbs of Amman in Jordan, they told us the location is gone. We cannot shoot there anymore. They took away the permit because too politically sensitive. We had literally 15 minutes with Rana to decide what to do. We shoot it anyway, somewhere else. Where do we find the location? We shoot it inside the truck instead of outside. I mean, that was really insane. Of course, stuff like this happen all the time on sets, but not for these kind of reasons. You know, the political, okay, that's we got the permit, but somehow we never got it because it was too politically sensitive, and somehow we never knew that we never got it until the last moment. Disaster.
What did you do?
Well, we instead of filming it from outside and inside the truck, the passage of the frontier when they cross the border, we filmed the whole thing from inside the truck. We seeing outside as little as possible. That's the only way we could do it, and that's what we did, and it's ended up okay. Is that okay? Is that okay? We say this? Or?
Yes, absolutely. Let's see. So I want to go back to this question of genre, which I think is really interesting. This film is one of, I think, a very small number of thrillers. I can only actually think of two about the Syrian war. And I'm wondering what telling this story as a thriller, as a political thriller, enabled you to do. Like, what did that make possible, that choice?
It's a great question. We love the work of Costa Gavras, who is also known for making political thrillers.
Sure.
And the political thriller as a genre really flourished in the 1970s and 1980s. I don't think it's necessarily flourishing today. I wonder if it'll make a comeback, but we are, you know, I mean, we're grateful to all the people who have embraced the film, but I think there are probably just as many people who aren't sure what to do with a film that is so overtly political and taking a position. And I think that's a journey that we're just in the process now of discovering.
I mean, I wonder if there's also something about, I remember in the early years of the Arab Spring that there were these, you know, the films that were coming out of the Middle East and North Africa were almost exclusively documentaries. Sometimes it seemed like almost unedited footage because people were so desperate to get the information out into the world. I wonder if fiction takes longer, if it just, right, the sort of, I would like what we were talking about earlier, the sort of looking back on events and understanding them and then conveying that understanding through a script and a character and a story arc, if that just is inevitably a longer term process, but also that allows audience access to a story in a different way.
Yeah, for sure, you have to digest the events more or in a different way before going into a fiction journey with a story, for sure. And it took us a long time. That goes back to your previous question, to know which story we wanted to tell and which film we wanted to make about the Syrian Revolution as the first fiction film about the Syrian Revolution. So yes, you somehow you have to be patient and know exactly who you're making it for and for what reasons. And really this for us was so obvious. It was for an international audience. Of course, the Middle Eastern audience for sure, but they already know the story. But the international audience to know what happened, and if and we are succeeding if after watching the film they go on the internet and they start to look up some information. Okay, this happened 2011. Okay, when ISIS did come 2 years later, so that was not the same period, because you know ISIS in the story of Syria, recent history of Syria, is very, very present, and our film is not about that because it was pre-ISIS, you know, pre-Islamic State and pre all of this mess. It was already a mess, but a different one.
A different mess, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so turning to the film itself, I think one of the great pleasures of doing Q&As is getting to ask, maybe especially in this format, is getting to ask the questions that you imagine the audience might have. And I think that one of those questions is going to be, when Sammy mistranslates at the press conference, is it deliberate?
So
you can also choose not to answer, but I think it's you know, a question, an intriguing question at the heart of the film.
So it's, you know, this idea of the slip of the tongue. Right? So if you're Freud, you would say that, you know, on some sort of subconscious level, that it was deliberate, right? And I think maybe to answer your question, if this is a satisfying answer enough, it would just be that there's only so much Sammy could repress the idea of whether or not he had done it deliberately, and that the character of Karma, his sister-in-law, is the one who has to say, you did it on purpose.
Okay.
So you could be free.
So you could be free.
Right.
That's what he tells him.
Yeah. But that's interesting, because she also accuses him of hiding behind other people's words, when in fact the words were his own. I mean, he's hiding behind the other person, but maybe using that person to express his own ideas.
So, I mean, it's lovely. Again, you know, Justine, like we haven't shared the film with an audience yet, right? So what's exciting right now about these questions that you're asking is that we are answering them for the first time for an audience. So what's lovely about what you're saying is that it's almost that, Sammy suffers from this sort of complex of never having lived up to what his brother and his dad were. And having chosen this profession that allowed him to hide. And yet this slip of the tongue is a way of saying, oh boy, it's there. Right? As it could be in any one of us, that when you suddenly crack open your voice, right? As it finally is given room to escape, which it, you know, it does, of course, at the end of the film, you know, is that this is, it was clearly there working on his subconscious level. He knew, you know, he called it a mistake. But right, that was his way of hiding.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's what was his way of hiding. But his sister-in-law Karma also tells him, and she's really trying to hurt him with those words, which it does. The effect is there. She tells him, "You're nothing like your brother and your father," and this is very hard for him to hear because it's true. It's absolutely true. until he changes something about it. But
Well, and let's talk about that change a little bit. I mean, he seems to go from, at the beginning of the film or earlier in the film, saying, you know, like from a position of this is what they are saying, right? To at the end saying, this is what I am saying. How does he make that leap? How does that happen for him?
You know, what's sad about the situation in Syria as it's existed for so long is that there never really is a way out. So I think what Sammy probably realized was that the only truth in that moment was going to be whatever it was that he could own and control himself.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what was promised to him, if he did what he was told. We know this from friends who have been in the exact same situation that Sammy was put in, that it doesn't necessarily mean what they say it means.
Sure.
That it won't be your salvation. I think also what's happening to Sammy in that moment is, I think it would have been very hard for him to continue living with himself anyway, had he not said what he says.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And if we want to answer your previous question by saying yes, he did that on purpose, then the end of the film is the logic continuation end of the journey of that slip of the tongue that started 11 years earlier. So it's a long journey of a decade for him. But yeah, we maybe this is logical when you see the beginning of the film and you go towards the end. Maybe not. Let's see what the audience will say.
I think what was hard in that moment, because my goodness, the ending was debated and debated and debated because there's so many choices that we could have made differently with how it ended. And I think what was hard about choosing to end it this way was that I never wanted it to feel like judgment was being passed on anybody who might have made a different decision than Sammy in that moment. And I think that that's always what was going to be hard to reconcile.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that because it just is such a, you know, maybe the defining theme of the film, or certainly one of them, is this question of obligation and guilt. And Rana, you were talking about that Sammy might not have been able to live with himself had he made a different choice. And I imagine that this is a difficult and fraught subject, and that and one that Syrians inside and now outside the country have to grapple with. How did you negotiate that very difficult terrain in a way that could speak to as many of them as possible, could reflect those experiences without judgment, as you say?
I mean, I come at this with a lot of humility and humbleness because I was not as I said right at the very beginning, I was not somebody who took a courageous stand. And yet we knew so many people that had.
Absolutely.
And I think it was the recognition that I wasn't that person. And at the same time, just feeling compelled to honor people who, throughout history have made the decision to say, like, I mean, it's, what would you die for? To have answered that question. And again, at the same time, what I do think is that not everybody has to risk their life to participate. There are so many ways in which we can participate in making the world better. So I didn't want to, sort of value this way of participating over anything else. And yet, when we are in a world where people clearly do make that choice, and that we benefit, hopefully one day from the freedom that, that other people have sacrificed their lives for, then we have to, I don't know, it felt important to honor that choice.
You talked a little bit earlier about the different political contexts around the world to which this film is relevant. I'm wondering if you have yet had the chance to show the film in festivals in any of those countries.
That's a good question. Not yet, Hong Kong, Belarus, Venezuela. No, not yet, not really. In the Middle East, we have a distributor who's gonna show it in the whole Middle East region plus North Africa, but it hasn't been shown yet because of the COVID situation, of course. But yes, that's definitely gonna do something when it's shown there, for sure.
Yeah.
And as you saw also in the film, when he opens the book and goes through the books, and we see these photos and context of those peaceful demonstrators being killed, and it happens if you remember, it's in Russia, it's in China, it's in France, it's in England, and it's in the US. And that's the 5 countries who are the permanent members of the Security Council at the UN, So of course this is very relevant to the scene and to the whole film and to the whole idea of the struggle.
Right.
It's a very important scene in the film because, again, I think in order, to draw on this universal theme of finding your voice, that it was so important to not let countries be let off the hook for their own ways of having deal with and continue to deal with unarmed people.
Absolutely. That feels particularly relevant in the US at the moment, I have to say. I know your film is still really early in its festival journey, and of course things have been, everything's been disrupted by the pandemic, but I think it'll be fascinating when your film is able to show in some of those countries the kinds of conversations that I hope you're able to have with those audiences.
Exciting. There's a partnership that we do have for the film already that we're excited about, which is Global R2P, which is affiliated with the UN in support of citizens' rights and the right to be protected from your government.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. Tell me again the name of the program.
Yeah, I wanted to actually, I just have to Google to make sure I have the website because the last time I got it wrong.
It's called the Global R2P, Responsibility to Protect.
Okay.
And it's brought out in the film.
And the website is globalr2p.org.
Okay. See, this is one of the advantages of Zoom Q&As. We have
Right.
people at our fingertips.
True. I'm not
And
getting your phone out.
So it's the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. And so it was meaningful to align ourselves with this organization. And I was hoping that we would align ourselves with this organization eventually. And that's why it's actually mentioned in the film at some point. The organization is actually mentioned in the journalists' conversation that's happening in Australia that they're watching when they're in Damascus.
Oh, okay. Sure. Right. All right. Well, Anas Khalaf and Rana Kazkaz, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your remarkable and powerful film, The Translator, with our audiences. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Justine. Thank you so much.
Of course.